Hello, good to see you again. Congratulations on getting your first paper for our summer class finished. I'm assuming that by the time you're looking at this, you've completed the final draft of the rhetorical analysis paper. I appreciate your work on that, and I'm looking forward to reading them and getting them graded and getting some feedback over to you soon. I will warn you that you're going to hear a chicken clucking through most of this video, but that's okay. I'll introduce him to you at the very end, so stick around for that. So now that you've finished the rhetorical analysis paper, we can start talking about the next project, which is an op-ed. Now, you remember from the beginning of the class, I mentioned to you, I don't like 5 paragraph essays. That goes against the idea that writing is determined by what an audience expects, by the writing genre you're writing within, right? It's not driven by these kind of strange models that we force upon things like that they should have 5 paragraphs, right? And so I like for my students to write an op-ed because this is a real writing genre. If you open up any mainstream periodical, you will find an opinion section, and there you will find op-eds, opinionated articles about issues that are arising in national issues or state issues. And indeed, the few pages prior to this video gave you an opportunity to look at some examples of op-eds, both in a local news like Arizona Central, but also in a national periodical like the New York Times. And of course, there's lots and lots of other pages that I could show you of op-eds, but I just wanted you to get a feel for what these are, because that's what you're going to write for me in the next major paper is your own op-ed. We'll talk about the topic in a minute, right? But first, let's talk a little bit more about what op-eds are. Okay, as usual, this Prezi is linked on the same page as the video if you want to relook at it on your own. Okay, so let's talk about what op-eds do. As you know from reading the previous pages, the term comes from back when we had print newspapers. The back of the A section was all opinionated stuff. On the left-hand side, you had the editorials, the opinions of the folks that ran the paper. And then on the opposite side, get it, opposite the editorials, you had opinions from experts, right? And so you could imagine how all of the folks who wrote the articles for the New York Times about CTE and the NFL, Washington, Koch, and Graham, they're all experts in their own way. You know that from writing about their appeals to ethos. All right, let's get into this here. Okay, so these are the two main requirements, really, of any op-ed. If you look at different periodicals, they're going to be different lengths. Some periodicals, they want you to, Chicago Tribune, they want you to write something that's less than 600 words. New York Times, things that are less than 1,000, right? So certainly there's an emphasis on brevity, and you have to take a stance on a current issue. It has to be something that people are discussing. Can't be an issue from 10 years ago. And the idea here is you're not just telling people what you think, you are trying to persuade them to agree with you, to see things the way that you do. Okay, I do think it's important to talk about the why here. People don't write these things for fun, although some of them are good enough. Some people are good enough at these that they do get paid to write them. But it's a big part of our democracy. It really is because, as mentioned when we talked about rhetoric and democracies, we don't work out things via shows of force, right? We work out things via discussion and op-eds and editorials, all this opinionated writing. These are places where we can have public discussion, where people's minds are potentially changed, or where they make decisions about where they stand on important issues that they could potentially even vote on. And interestingly enough, if you look at most online op-eds, a lot of times there's a place where readers can comment. Again, because the newspaper, they want you to participate in that conversation to some degree. That's how a healthy democracy works. Okay, so we already mentioned that. Got to be a current issue. You've got to have a stance, right? So you'll need a thesis for your op-ed. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And then you're going to need to convince them to see things your way. And of course, to do that, that's the really tricky part, is the last thing there, right? You can come up with the best thesis in the world, and that in and of itself is not going to convince anybody, right? The magic of persuasion, you've thought about this and wrote about it in the last paper. right? So in the last paper, you wrote about the rhetorical appeals, how other people use them. In this paper, in the op-ed, it's your turn to make use of the understanding you now have of those appeals. You're not going to use the words logos, ethos, and pathos in your op-ed because, of course, op-ed writers don't do that. That's a feature of analytical writing for an academic audience, and you're not doing that in an op-ed. Op-eds are for popular audiences, right? So you're going to have appeals to logos, but you're not going to use that word. Again, like any author who hopes to appeal to logos, you're going to offer logical reasons to support why you believe what you do. Perhaps you will have examples from sources, evidence, perhaps, and indeed there are two sources that I'm going to require you to read about this topic to help you learn more about it, and each of them offers you some potential evidence and logical proofs you could use to try to convince your reader. All op-eds have some form of an appeal to logos. Okay, your ethos. Now, I'm sure you're feeling like, well, I don't have as much credibility as some op-ed writers, but there are things you can do within the paper to build that credibility, right? So you're going to continue to demonstrate your understanding of MLA formatting. That shows your reader you know what you're doing, right? You're going to use proper citation and attribute the sources you use. Okay. Obviously, we always talk about grammar in English classes, but a lot of times we don't talk about why it's important, right? And, you can have the best ideas in the world, but unfortunately, if you've got confusing grammatical issues in every single sentence, it hurts your credibility. It makes the reader less likely to listen, and we don't want that. Interestingly enough, because op-eds are designed for popular audiences is like really anybody in the country who wants to read and learn about an issue, right? Whereas in the last paper, we said that was for an academic audience, so it was just for what I like to call professors and their victims, right? It's for scholars like you and me. Popular audiences is everybody else, right? People who read newspapers. And when you're writing for those audiences in an op-ed, you can use I statements, right? And I'm sure that you remember, I believe at least one of the football articles that I gave you to read for the last paper includes some I statements. I think Graham uses some I statements, and I believe Koch uses the word we, right? So it's acceptable to use I statements in your paper. Interestingly enough, some of you may even be able to use personal experience as a form of appeals to logos in the op-ed, but we'll talk more about that once we talk about what the topic is. Okay, and of course, we can't forget appeals to pathos, the emotional appeals, right? Now, here's the thing. I think for most students, if they can find a way to care about the topic, the pathos finds its way naturally into their writing. Indeed, for many writers, myself included, when you're revising, you want to be sure you haven't included too much emotion-driven language, right? Because, and we'll talk about this, you don't want to write just towards the people who already agree with you. The idea is that you want to try to convince some of those people who are on the fence, right? And if you come on too strong with heavily emotional appeals, you can turn them off, right? It'll make them not want to read your ideas. But of course, yeah, you will want some appeals to pathos there. Okay, so now, of course, one more thing. It's not like you're going to write a paragraph about each of these like you did in the last paper, right? You want to get away from this idea that, there's one way to write things, right? Again, we'll talk about the structure of the paper, but, embedded throughout it, you will have the use of all three of these rhetorical appeals, I'm sure. Okay, so you want to know what the topic is. That's reasonable. You know that I like both of these things, but I can't really have you write an op-ed about that because it's not a current issue, right? Solitary confinement, however, is a current and pressing issue about which there has been a great deal of debate on a national scale, and there's actually been quite a few op-eds written about it. You'll read two of them as for later this week. Right? But I think that's about all I've got for now. I just wanted to talk to you about what op-eds are so you can start to get an idea about what I'm asking you to do. Obviously, in future pages, there's going to be the instructions for the rhetorical analysis, or the instructions, pardon me, for the op-ed paper. And I've even got a really great how to write an op-ed guide that I found online from Harvard that you'll see as well. And I think that will be helpful to you. That's all I've got. Take care. Oh, wait a minute. I said I would let you meet the chicken. Hold on a minute. This is my parrot, Nico. Say hi, Nico. My kids like to call him our colorful chicken. So that's who you heard clucking in the background. This is sort of his room too. I share it with him. And so there's going to be times where you're going to hear him in the background of my videos. Um, he is quite a difficult pet to own. I don't advocate owning parrots, but we do love him and we do our best to take care of him. And I think he looks like he's kind of excited to be in the video. So anyway, yes, say hi. He's not very good at talking yet. He's working on that. All right, take care, and we'll talk to you next time.